The house was unnervingly quiet, a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight pressing down on Ethan's chest. He sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the glowing screen of his phone, rereading the message that had shattered his world. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I didn't mean for it to happen like this, but I found someone else. Please don't contact me. It's better this way." It had come from Claire, his wife of 8 years, mere hours after she'd kissed him goodbye, claiming she had an emergency meeting with her manager. Now she was gone. Ethan glanced around their bedroom, his chest tightening further. Her suitcase was still in the closet. Her favorite shoes sat neatly by the door. But the essentials she always carried on work trips, her laptop bag, phone charger, and toiletry kit, were missing. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. Claire had planned this. For a long moment, Ethan sat frozen, the message on his phone seared into his brain. Then anger surged through the shock, burning away his paralysis. He began searching the house, his mind racing with questions. In her office, he found her desk in disarray, papers scattered haphazardly across the surface. Most were innocuous: bills, receipts, handwritten notes, but an envelope stood out among the clutter. It bore a name Ethan didn't recognize: Marcus. His hands trembled as he pulled out the contents. A photograph of Claire and another man, arms wrapped around each other, smiling warmly at the camera. The location in the picture made Ethan's stomach churn. It was their park, the one where they celebrated every anniversary. His breath hitched as he flipped the photo over and saw the date scrawled on the back. 3 days ago. The man in the photo wasn't a stranger. It was Marcus Delaney, Ethan's best friend since college. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears as he stared at the picture. Marcus, the man who had toasted his wedding, celebrated their milestones, and sat at his dinner table more times than Ethan could count, was the one Claire had left him for. Ethan placed the photo back in the envelope with deliberate care, his jaw tightening as he tried to make sense of the betrayal. It wasn't just Claire who had deceived him. Marcus had smiled in his face and torn apart the life they had built. Rage boiled under Ethan's skin, but he didn't act on it. He wasn't impulsive by nature, and this wasn't a situation he could rush. Instead, he opened Claire's laptop, knowing she rarely logged out of her accounts. Emails, text messages, and social media DMs laid bare the full extent of their deceit. The affair hadn't started recently. It had been going on for nearly a year, woven so seamlessly into their lives that Ethan hadn't seen it. Every work meeting and business trip Claire had mentioned in passing had been a rendezvous with Marcus. The betrayal deepened when Ethan found messages between the two that weren't even coded. Claire had written, "I hate hiding this. He deserves to know." Marcus had replied, "Soon. Let me handle it." The words made Ethan's stomach churn. They had planned to tell him on their terms, not his. Ethan's hands clenched into fists as he stared at the screen. He wanted to confront them both immediately, but he knew it would only feed their narrative. They would paint him as the unstable, spurned husband and justify their actions. Instead, Ethan leaned into his anger, letting it sharpen his thoughts. If Marcus and Claire thought they could escape unscathed, they were sorely mistaken. He spent the next several days meticulously gathering evidence, documenting every message and interaction between the two of them. When he had enough to expose their lies, he turned his attention to Marcus. A quick online search revealed cracks in Marcus's carefully crafted image. He wasn't the successful entrepreneur he claimed to be. His business was bleeding money, and his name appeared in legal filings tied to unpaid debts and questionable deals. Ethan felt a grim satisfaction as he dug deeper. Marcus wasn't just untrustworthy, he was vulnerable. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Ethan received an invitation to a charity gala hosted by Marcus. The invitation, sent by a mutual friend unaware of the betrayal, was the perfect opportunity for Ethan to make his move. He RSVP'd with a single word, yes. When the evening of the gala arrived, Ethan dressed sharply, his mind laser-focused on the confrontation ahead. He arrived at the event calm and composed, mingling with guests as though nothing was amiss. Then he saw them. Claire, resplendent in a glittering gown, was draped on Marcus's arm. They laughed together as if nothing in the world could touch them. Ethan approached casually, his heart pounding but his expression betraying nothing. "Marcus," he said smoothly, extending a hand. Marcus's face blanched, guilt flashing in his eyes. "Ethan, I didn't expect to see you here." Ethan's smile was razor-sharp. "Of course you didn't." Claire turned toward him, her face pale. "Ethan, save it," Ethan said, his voice low and even. "We'll have plenty of time to catch up later." Before either of them could respond, Ethan walked away, leaving them to stew in their discomfort. But Ethan wasn't finished. That night, after leaving the gala, he put the next phase of his plan into motion. With a few carefully placed phone calls, he ensured Marcus's creditors received detailed information about his financial troubles. He sent copies of the emails and texts to Marcus's business partners, raising questions about his integrity. Within days, Marcus's carefully curated life began to crumble. And for the first time in weeks, Ethan felt the satisfaction of regaining control. Ethan's calculated move against Marcus had been a success. Within days, whispers about Marcus's financial troubles spread through their social circle. Ethan watched from a distance as the consequences of Marcus's reckless behavior began to unravel, but he wasn't ready to stop yet. If Marcus and Claire thought they could betray him without repercussions, they were about to learn otherwise. Ethan spent the next week continuing his quiet investigation, reaching out to people from Marcus's past. It didn't take long to uncover more damning information. Marcus had a history of financial manipulation and deceit. Former business partners described him as charming but untrustworthy, a man who knew how to play the part of a respectable entrepreneur while bleeding people dry behind the scenes. Among the people Ethan contacted was a woman named Vanessa, who had been Marcus's business partner in a failed startup years ago. When Ethan explained the situation, Vanessa didn't hesitate to provide details about how Marcus had duped her into signing contracts that left her financially ruined while he walked away unscathed. Vanessa's story gave Ethan an idea. Armed with this new information, Ethan orchestrated another move. He reached out to one of Marcus's remaining investors under the guise of a concerned third party, subtly planting seeds of doubt about Marcus's trustworthiness. A few carefully chosen words, and the investor was eager to listen, especially when Ethan shared copies of Vanessa's testimony and financial documents. By the end of the conversation, Ethan knew he'd struck another blow. Meanwhile, Claire's absence from Ethan's life had left a void he hadn't yet confronted. He threw himself into work during the day, but the evenings were the hardest. The house was too quiet, too full of memories of the life they'd shared. He found himself staring at her empty closet, the lingering scent of her perfume a cruel reminder of her betrayal. But Ethan refused to let grief consume him. Instead, he channeled his pain into a new routine. He started going to the gym every morning before work, pushing his body to its limits in an effort to drown out the emotional turmoil. Slowly but surely, he began to rebuild his confidence. He also started attending social events he would have avoided in the past, reconnecting with old friends and making new ones. One evening, Ethan was at a networking event when he struck up a conversation with a woman named Lauren. She was sharp, funny, and refreshingly straightforward. A stark contrast to the calculated lies Claire had spun. Their conversation flowed easily, and by the end of the night, Ethan felt lighter than he had in weeks. Lauren's presence became a regular part of Ethan's life in the weeks that followed. She didn't pry into his past, but her steady support gave him a sense of stability he hadn't realized he needed. As Ethan's personal life began to stabilize, Marcus's world continued to fall apart. The investor Ethan had tipped off withdrew their funding, forcing Marcus to make a desperate attempt to save his company. But Ethan wasn't done yet. Through his contacts, Ethan learned that Marcus had organized a high-stakes business dinner in a final bid to secure a lifeline. Ethan decided it was time to confront Marcus directly. The evening of the dinner, Ethan showed up uninvited, his presence commanding attention as he walked into the private dining room. Marcus, seated at the head of the table, visibly paled when he saw Ethan. "Ethan," Marcus said, his voice tight, "this isn't the time or place." "I disagree," Ethan replied smoothly, taking an empty seat at the table. "I think this is exactly the time and place." The other guests exchanged confused glances, their curiosity piqued by the tension in the room. Ethan leaned forward, his gaze locked on Marcus. "You've been lying to these people, haven't you, Marcus? About your finances, your track record, everything." Marcus's face darkened, but he didn't interrupt. Ethan continued, pulling out a folder filled with documents he had compiled. "This is the truth about Marcus Delaney. I thought you all deserved to know before you make any decisions." He passed the folder around the table, watching as the guests' expressions shifted from curiosity to shock. "This is absurd," Marcus said, his voice rising. "You're just a bitter ex trying to ruin me." Ethan smiled coldly. "You've done a fine job of ruining yourself, Marcus. I'm just making sure everyone knows who they're dealing with." The meeting ended abruptly, the investors walking out without a word to Marcus. Ethan stayed behind, savoring the look of defeat on Marcus's face. "You think you've won?" Marcus hissed, his composure cracking. "This isn't about winning," Ethan said, his tone calm but firm. "It's about justice." With that, Ethan walked out, leaving Marcus to deal with the fallout. Later that night, Ethan received a text from Claire. "We need to talk." Ethan stared at the message for a long moment before typing a single-word response, "Tomorrow." He knew the conversation was inevitable, but he wasn't sure if he was ready for what Claire might say. Regardless, he would face it head-on, just as he had faced everything else since their betrayal. Ethan wasn't the same man Claire had left behind, and tomorrow, she would see that for herself. The morning arrived with a weight that pressed heavily on Ethan's chest. Claire's text hung in his mind, its simplicity masking the complexity of what was to come. As he sipped his coffee, his thoughts wavered between anticipation and dread. What could she possibly want? Was this an attempt at reconciliation, an explanation, or something entirely different? By the time Ethan arrived at the cafe where they'd agreed to meet, he felt more composed. He had come too far to let her presence unsettle him. Claire was already there, sitting at a corner table, nervously stirring a cup of tea. She looked different, though Ethan couldn't quite place why. Perhaps it was the absence of confidence that had once defined her, a confidence that had turned to betrayal. "Ethan," she said as he approached, her voice soft, almost hesitant. He nodded and sat down across from her, his expression neutral. "Claire." For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, the weight of their shared history pressing down on both of them. "I owe you an apology," Claire began, breaking the silence. Ethan raised an eyebrow, waiting. "I made a mistake," she continued, her voice trembling. "I thought leaving you was what I wanted, but I was wrong." The words felt rehearsed, hollow, as though they were designed to elicit forgiveness rather than express true remorse. "Is that why you wanted to meet?" Ethan asked coolly. "To tell me you regret your choices?" Claire flinched at the sharpness in his tone. "I know I hurt you. I wasn't thinking clearly, and Marcus, he wasn't who I thought he was." Ethan's jaw tightened. "What do you mean?" Claire hesitated, her gaze dropping to the table. "He lied to me, Ethan, about everything. His finances, his past. He even lied about why he pursued me. And you're just now figuring that out?" Ethan said, his voice laced with disbelief. Claire's eyes welled with tears. "I was stupid, okay? He made me feel special, wanted, but it was all a game to him. And now he's turning on me." The revelation didn't surprise Ethan, but hearing it from Claire stirred something unexpected, pity. As much as he wanted to hate her, seeing her like this, broken and remorseful, softened his resolve. "What do you expect me to do?" he asked after a long pause. "Fix it for you? Undo what you did to me?" Claire shook her head quickly. "No, I'm not asking for that. I needed to tell you the truth. I've lost everything, Ethan, and it's all my fault." Her voice cracked on the last word, and for the first time in months, Ethan saw the woman he had fallen in love with, the woman who had been a part of his life for so long. But that didn't change what she had done. "I appreciate your honesty," Ethan said finally. But it doesn't erase the damage. You made your choice, Claire. And now you have to live with it. Claire nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know. I wanted you to know how sorry I am. For everything. Ethan stood, his heart heavy but his mind clear. Take care of yourself, Claire. He walked out of the cafe, leaving her behind. It wasn't the closure he had expected, but it was enough. As Ethan drove home, his phone buzzed with a message from Lauren. How's your morning going? Ethan smiled for the first time that day. He quickly typed a reply, interesting. I'll tell you about it later. Lauren had become a constant in his life, a bright light amidst the shadows of betrayal. Their connection was easy, genuine, and free of the complications that had defined his relationship with Claire. But the day's surprises weren't over. Later that afternoon, Ethan received an email from Marcus's former business partner, Vanessa. You'll want to see this, it read, followed by an attachment. Curiosity piqued, Ethan opened the file. It contained financial records detailing transactions Marcus had hidden from investors, using shell companies to siphon funds for personal use. The scale of the fraud was staggering. Ethan's first instinct was to forward the file to the authorities, but a thought stopped him. This was an opportunity, a chance to confront Marcus with irrefutable evidence of his deceit. That evening, Ethan called Marcus. We need to talk, he said when Marcus answered. I have nothing to say to you, Marcus snapped. You might change your mind after you see what I have, Ethan replied calmly. There was a pause, then Marcus sighed. Fine. Tomorrow. My office. The call ended, and Ethan leaned back in his chair, a plan already forming in his mind. The next day, Ethan arrived at Marcus's sleek, glass-walled office with a folder tucked under his arm. Marcus greeted him with a forced smile, his irritation barely concealed. Make it quick, Marcus said, gesturing for Ethan to sit. Ethan didn't bother with pleasantries. He placed the folder on Marcus's desk and opened it, spreading the documents in front of him. What is this? Marcus asked, his confidence wavering as he scanned the pages. It's the truth, Ethan said, about your little side projects. I wonder how your investors would react if they saw this. Marcus's face darkened. You wouldn't dare. Ethan leaned forward, his voice steady. I'm not interested in destroying you, Marcus, but I will if you give me a reason to. This ends now. No more games, no more manipulation. You stay out of my life and Claire's. Marcus's expression shifted from anger to panic. What do you want? I want you gone, Ethan said simply. Take your lies, your schemes, and disappear. Marcus hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Fine. You win. Ethan stood, his mission accomplished. Remember, he said as he left, I'm not the one you should fear. It's the truth that will ruin you. As he walked out of the building, Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time in months, he was free. Free from the betrayal, the anger, and the pain. And as he drove home, he realized he wasn't just moving on. He was moving forward. Ethan spent the following days in a state of cautious relief. His confrontation with Marcus had been a turning point, a moment where he reclaimed control of his narrative. Marcus's begrudging agreement to stay away felt like a victory, though Ethan knew better than to let his guard down completely. People like Marcus rarely disappeared without a fight. But for now, Ethan focused on rebuilding. His relationship with Lauren continued to grow, their shared laughter and unspoken understanding offering him a solace he hadn't known he needed. Yet, there was a lingering thought in the back of his mind. Claire's warning. Had Marcus truly given up, or was he lying low, waiting for the right moment to strike? The answer came sooner than Ethan expected. It was late one evening when Ethan received a knock on his door. He wasn't expecting visitors, and the sight of Claire standing on his porch, disheveled and trembling, sent a surge of concern through him. Claire? What are you doing here? He asked, stepping aside to let her in. She stumbled into the living room, her eyes darting around nervously. I didn't know where else to go, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He's coming after me. Ethan froze. Marcus? Claire nodded, her hands clutching the strap of her bag. After I told him I was done, he started showing up at my place at work. He says I owe him, that he won't let me go that easily. Ethan's jaw tightened. What exactly does he think you owe him? Everything, Claire said, her voice cracking. He paid for our apartment, the trips, everything. And now that I've ended it, he's demanding it all back, or else. Ethan let out a long breath, his mind racing. This wasn't just a personal vendetta anymore. It was a calculated move by Marcus to keep Claire under his control. And Ethan knew Marcus well enough to believe he wouldn't stop there. You can stay here tonight, Ethan said finally, but we need to figure out how to handle this. Claire looked at him, her eyes glistening with tears. Thank you, Ethan. I don't deserve your kindness, but thank you. The next morning, Ethan called Lauren to explain the situation. As expected, she wasn't thrilled about Claire staying at his place, but she understood. Just be careful, Lauren warned. Marcus doesn't strike me as the kind of guy who backs down easily. I will, Ethan assured her. I just need to make sure Claire is safe. But keeping Claire safe was easier said than done. That evening, as Ethan and Claire discussed their next steps, a brick smashed through the front window, sending shards of glass flying across the room. Ethan rushed to the door, but whoever had thrown the brick was already gone. Attached to it was a note scrawled in bold, angry letters. You're next? Claire paled as she read the note, her hands trembling. He's serious, Ethan. He won't stop. Ethan clenched his fists. Then it's time we stop him. Ethan reached out to Vanessa, Marcus's former business partner, for help. She had already provided valuable intel, and Ethan hoped she might have more information they could use. Vanessa met him at a cafe the next day, sliding a manila folder across the table. This is everything I've been able to dig up on Marcus since we last spoke, she said. It's worse than I thought. Ethan flipped through the folder, his anger mounting with each page. Fraud, blackmail, threats. Marcus had left a trail of destruction in his wake, and Claire was just the latest victim. There's enough here to take him down, Vanessa continued, but you need to be smart about it. Marcus has connections, and he's not afraid to use them. Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. I'm done letting him call the shots. That evening, Ethan sat down with Claire to go over their plan. They would compile the evidence Vanessa had provided and take it to the authorities. But first, Ethan needed Claire to be completely honest. Claire, he said, his tone serious. Is there anything else I need to know? Anything Marcus might use against you? Claire hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. There's one thing, she admitted. When we were together, he convinced me to sign some documents. I didn't realize it at the time, but they made me a co-signer on some of his debts. Ethan's stomach dropped. Claire, that means he can pin part of this on you. I know, she said, her voice trembling, but I didn't know what I was signing. I was so caught up in everything. Ethan rubbed his temples, frustration bubbling to the surface. This makes things more complicated, but we'll figure it out. The next day, Ethan and Claire met with Vanessa and a lawyer she had recommended. Together, they reviewed the evidence and mapped out their next steps. The lawyer assured them that Claire's role in Marcus's schemes could be mitigated, given the circumstances. But just as they began to feel a glimmer of hope, Ethan received a call from Lauren. Ethan, she said, her voice tight with worry. I think someone's been following me. Ethan's heart sank. What do you mean? On my way home, I noticed the same car behind me for miles. And when I pulled into my driveway, it just stopped and drove off. Ethan's mind raced. Marcus was escalating, and now he was targeting Lauren. A move that felt both calculated and personal. Stay inside, Ethan said firmly. I'll be there as soon as I can. As he hung up, Ethan felt a surge of anger like never before. Marcus had crossed a line, and Ethan was determined to make him pay. But the next move had to be perfect. One wrong step, and Marcus would slip away. Or worse, strike again. Ethan knew the final confrontation with Marcus was inevitable. Every step Marcus had taken to escalate the situation, from threatening Claire to intimidating Lauren, had pushed Ethan closer to a breaking point. But instead of succumbing to anger, Ethan channeled his energy into precision. If Marcus wanted a war, Ethan would fight, but he would fight smart. The plan began to take shape as Ethan, Claire, Vanessa, and the lawyer convened in Vanessa's office. With the evidence they'd gathered, they now had a clear understanding of Marcus's vulnerabilities: fraud, unpaid debts, and even connections to criminal activities. Marcus had left a paper trail too damning to ignore. Vanessa laid out a map of potential allies they could involve. We'll need to hit him on all fronts. If we go to the authorities, we risk him running before they act. But if we tip off the media simultaneously, he won't have anywhere to hide. Ethan nodded. And Claire's name? We need to make sure this doesn't come back on her. The lawyer interjected. If we position Claire as a victim coerced into complicity, the case will hold stronger. But Marcus's legal team won't go down without a fight. We'll need to move quickly. Vanessa leaned forward. There's one more thing. Marcus has a hidden account, one he's been using to funnel money into offshore holdings. If we expose it, it'll cripple his financial safety net. Ethan's jaw tightened. How do we get access? Vanessa hesitated. I have a contact who can help, but it's risky, and it might tip him off. Ethan's gaze was steady. We don't have a choice. The first move was subtle but effective. Vanessa's contact, a tech-savvy friend named Miles, managed to intercept Marcus's communications. While digging into his financial dealings, they discovered something alarming. Marcus was planning to flee the country. His flight was booked for the following evening, with a one-way ticket to a non-extradition country. Then we move tonight, Ethan said firmly. If we don't stop him now, we'll lose our chance. Vanessa picked up her phone. I'll tip off the media. Once they start asking questions, Marcus won't be able to disappear without drawing attention. Ethan turned to Claire. Are you ready for this? She nodded, though her hands trembled. I don't have a choice. That evening, Ethan and Vanessa staged a press release, anonymously leaking the evidence they had gathered. Within hours, Marcus's name was trending across social media. The story broke like a tidal wave. Wealthy mogul accused of fraud, manipulation, and exploitation. Ethan watched the news coverage with a mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. The media frenzy meant Marcus's plans to flee were effectively thwarted, but it also meant he was cornered, and cornered predators were the most dangerous. His phone buzzed. It was Lauren. Ethan, she said, her voice shaky. He's here. Ethan's blood ran cold. What do you mean? Marcus. He's outside my house. I'm on my way, Ethan said, grabbing his keys. When Ethan arrived at Lauren's house, Marcus's car was gone, but Lauren was visibly shaken. She stood on her porch, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. He didn't try to get in, she said. He just sat there, watching. When he saw me call you, he drove off. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. Did he say anything? Lauren shook her head. No, but his look said enough. He's furious. Ethan exhaled sharply. You need to stay somewhere safe. I'll handle this. Lauren hesitated. Be careful, Ethan. He's not going to back down. The confrontation came sooner than expected. Later that night, as Ethan returned home, he found his door ajar. Every muscle in his body tensed as he stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. You're predictable, Ethan, Marcus's voice drawled from the shadows. He stepped into the dim light, his expression a mix of anger and amusement. All this effort to play hero. It's almost impressive. Ethan's heart pounded, but his voice was steady. You've lost, Marcus. The media knows, the authorities know. It's over. Marcus smirked, stepping closer. You think you've won because you leaked a few documents? I've been in worse situations and come out on top. This time is different, Ethan said. You don't have anywhere to run. Marcus's expression darkened. You think you're so righteous. But let's not forget. You didn't even see it coming when your wife betrayed you. Who's the real fool here? Ethan's jaw tightened, but he refused to rise to the bait. This isn't about me. It's about you and the lives you've destroyed. Marcus's laughter was cold and hollow. Spare me the lecture. You're just like me, Ethan. You want control. The only difference is I'm not afraid to take it. Before Marcus could continue, the sound of sirens cut through the air. Ethan's pulse quickened as flashing lights illuminated the windows. Marcus's confidence faltered. "What did you do?" Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "I told you, it's over." The door burst open, and police officers flooded the room, their weapons drawn. Marcus froze, his hands instinctively raised. As they cuffed him, Marcus turned to Ethan, his eyes burning with fury. "This isn't over, Carter." Ethan met his gaze, unflinching. "Yes, it is." In the days that followed Marcus's arrest, the pieces began to fall into place. The authorities seized his assets, his name was dragged through the mud, and Claire was finally free of his grasp. Lauren returned to her life without fear of being stalked, and Ethan found a sense of closure he hadn't thought possible. But most importantly, he had proven something to himself. He was no longer the man defined by betrayal. He had reclaimed his power, his dignity, and his future. Ethan stood on his porch one evening, watching the sunset. Claire and Vanessa had sent their thanks, and Lauren had promised to visit soon. For the first time in months, the air felt lighter, the future brighter. Ethan smiled to himself, knowing the fight was over. And this time, he had truly won. The morning after Marcus's arrest, Ethan stood in his living room, staring out the window as the sun climbed over the horizon. The world felt quieter, lighter. The months of chaos had come to an end, but the scars remained. Marks of betrayal, manipulation, and pain. Yet, they were also proof of his resilience. The fallout from Marcus's downfall was immediate and far-reaching. News outlets picked apart his fraudulent empire, exposing every lie and shady deal. Former associates came forward with their own stories, eager to distance themselves from his sinking ship. As Marcus faced a litany of charges, his name became synonymous with disgrace. For Claire, the weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change. Freed from Marcus's coercive grip, she began to rebuild her life, starting with therapy and a return to the career she had abandoned under his influence. She sent Ethan a heartfelt letter thanking him for believing in her and giving her the strength to fight back. "I owe you my freedom," she wrote. "I'll spend the rest of my life earning it." Lauren, too, found solace in the aftermath. With Marcus out of the picture, her life returned to normalcy. She reached out to Ethan often, offering support and gratitude. "You didn't just save me," she said during one of their conversations. "You reminded me what it means to stand up for myself." Ethan's journey was far from over, but for the first time, he felt at peace. The betrayal that had once defined him no longer held power over his heart. He had confronted his demons, both Marcus and his own, and emerged stronger. He no longer sought revenge or validation. Instead, he sought purpose. One afternoon, as Ethan cleaned out his office, he came across a box of photographs from his marriage with Emily. He hesitated before opening it, the weight of old memories pressing down on him. But when he finally lifted the lid, he found himself smiling. The photos were a testament to happier times. A wedding day full of hope, vacations filled with laughter, and moments of quiet intimacy. They were also a reminder of how far he had come. Ethan carefully placed the photos in a new box labeled Past, then tucked it away in the attic. Vanessa stopped by that evening, carrying a bottle of wine and a look of quiet pride. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass. Ethan clinked his glass against hers. "And to old endings." They sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Vanessa, always sharp and focused, seemed uncharacteristically contemplative. "You know," she said, "not many people would have had the strength to do what you did. It wasn't just about stopping Marcus. It was about reclaiming your life." Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I think, for a long time, I let what happened define me. I wanted to prove to Emily, to Marcus, to myself that I wasn't weak. But now, I don't need to prove anything. I just want to move forward." Vanessa smiled. "Well, you've earned it." Weeks turned into months, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. Ethan accepted a leadership position at work, his colleagues rallying around him with respect and admiration. He started running again, finding solace in the steady rhythm of his footsteps against the pavement. Lauren and Vanessa remained close, their friendship a source of strength and joy. Together, they planned small gatherings, dinners, hikes, and movie nights that reminded Ethan of the beauty in simple connections. One evening, as Ethan prepared for bed, his phone buzzed with a message from Claire. "I'm leaving for a fresh start tomorrow," it read. "I wanted you to know that I wouldn't be here without you. Thank you, Ethan. You're a good man." Ethan stared at the message, his chest tightening. He replied simply, "You're stronger than you think. Good luck." Months later, Ethan found himself standing in the park where everything had begun. The bench where he had first confronted Claire and Marcus was still there, its wood weathered by time. He sat down, letting the memories wash over him. This time, the weight of those memories didn't crush him. Instead, they felt like lessons, painful but necessary. They had shaped him, forged him into someone he could be proud of. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Mind if I sit?" Ethan looked up to see Lauren, her face framed by the golden glow of the setting sun. He smiled and gestured to the spot beside him. "Thinking about the past?" she asked, her tone light but curious. "Thinking about the future," Ethan corrected. He turned to her, his smile growing. "And how it's going to be a lot better." Lauren chuckled, leaning back against the bench. "Here's to that." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Ethan felt a quiet sense of contentment. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, he was ready to walk it, with hope in his heart and the knowledge that he could weather any storm. Ethan had reclaimed his life, and this time, it was entirely his own.